In May of 1945, I was stationed in England, assigned to the 418th Bomb Squadron, 100th Bomb Group, and had just recently been promoted to Major. The war ended on May the 7th of 1945. At that time, there were some 35 to 40 bomb groups equipped with B-17s and B-24s assigned to 8th Air Force in the United Kingdom. Immediately following the end of the war, these aircraft and crews were started to return to the United States. 3 bomb groups were supposed to remain in Europe as an occupational force in Germany, one of them being the 100th Bomb Group. So during the summer of 1945, all the other groups packed up, flew out, and returned to the zone of the interior, the United States. Later on, the decision was made that bombers would not be used for the occupational forces, and the crew members and aircraft of the 100th were released. In late September, I went to a depot on the west coast of England to pick up an airplane to fly it home. The airplanes were assigned not by any specific method other than first come, first served. I ended up being assigned to an aircraft that had been shot down, or at least had gone down, and landed in Switzerland. It had been on the ground there without maintenance for about a year. It had been returned to the UK, 2 new engines installed, and a few other minor repairs were made. And this was the aircraft I was to fly home. My crew was composed of myself, a Lieutenant Lebo as co-pilot. I understand that he worked for Eastern Airlines. I haven't heard from him since we arrived back in the States in 1945. The navigator was Charlie Scott. I've seen Charlie a time or two at bomb group reunions. The upper turret gunner or aircraft engineer was Jerry Wills. I hear from Jerry every Christmas. He runs or did own a pharmacy in Ohio. And the radio operator, Bob Schultz. I've seen Schultz several times since the war. He worked for FAA and is retired from FAA. The aircraft that we were assigned to did not have flotation gear, namely the dinghies and other emergency gear that's normally on board an aircraft. It had been removed by the people in Switzerland. And as this story starts, we were assigned 8, as I recall, 8 passengers. Well, by the way, if you want the tail number of this aircraft, call Dottie and ask her to look in the pocket of the A2 jacket that she has that I wore all during the war. And in that pocket are some of the flight plans used on the flight coming home, and the tail number of the aircraft will be on those. We were finally cleared to leave and go home or go back to the States by the northern route, which is to say Prestwick, Scotland to Greenland, Labrador, and then to a base in the States. However, when I got to Prestwick, I was told by the engineering people that the turbos on my aircraft were stretched beyond normal limits, and I suppose they were. However, aircraft in the training command flew turbos that were stretched far worse than the ones on this airplane were. In any event, the engineering officer would not clear me to fly across the Atlantic with the aircraft. So I returned to the depot where the aircraft had been assigned to me and got an engineering officer there to sign the aircraft off as flyable. I went back to Prestwick, all this in one day, and got up the next morning, went to briefing, all prepared to take off across the Atlantic, and we were told that no, we couldn't go because the weather was bad, and that we could not go the next day because that was the turn-off date for unwinterized aircraft. In other words, aircraft that were prepared for winter flying across the Atlantic. Our aircraft, as all combat aircraft, had had the de-icing boots removed from it. And I was told I'd have to go back down to Prestwick and have boots put on the aircraft before I could fly it home. Well, that didn't seem very reasonable to me. I'd been over there 14 months at the time, and I wanted to get home. So I went in to see the commanding officer, and he said, no problem. Tomorrow morning you take off and go south to Marseille, France. And I'll send a telegram down there to the commander, and we'll route you through the southern route. So the next morning, as instructed, I filed a flight plan and went down to Marseille. Oh, a little side story here. There was a bar in the officers' club at Prestwick known as Sloppy Joe's. And it was known to everybody most everybody who had ever flown into England, ferrying aircraft over during the war. At any rate, Sloppy Joe's was going out of business because the American forces were all going home. And they had very, very liberal prices on their bar goods, so we tried to take advantage of that. Consequently, we weren't feeling all that well when we departed for Marseille. We got down to Marseille and no telegram, and down there the people said, hey, you're going the wrong way. We're going to send you back to Prestwick. So I went in to see the commander there, and he agreed that I could go the southern route. And again, the Marseille Club had a bar that was going out of business, and I think drinks were a dime. Anyway, the following morning we got up, filed a flight plan, and we had to stay over the ocean. And that means down through the Mediterranean, out through the Straits of Gibraltar, and down the west coast of Africa until we were being Marrakech and turned. Got to Marrakech, but in the meantime, as we started through the Straits of Gibraltar, I had the airplane on automatic pilot, and all of a sudden the thing just nosed up. Problem, automatic pilot inoperative. So we had to fly the thing manually the rest of the way. Also, number 4 engine began to bounce around about every half hour. Wasn't running properly. So when I got to Marrakech, I went in to see the engineering people and suggested that they might want to change the engine, and they agreed that that would be a very good idea. The only problem was they didn't have anybody to change it, and Sergeant Will and myself would have to do the changing. So I asked Sergeant Will about that, and he said, well, he could change the harness on an engine, but changing an engine was beyond his capabilities. So that night, Sergeant Will and I changed the harness on number 4 engine. All the rest of the crew were up playing a poker game called Red Dog. Now, I understand that game had been going on for about a year and may still be going on for all I know, because in Red Dog you don't bet against your opponent, you bet against the pot. Everybody puts in the initial pot, and when you want to get into the game, you buy one of the players who's there out, and when you leave, you sell out to somebody else who wants to play. Now, I don't remember how the crews made out. I do remember this, however. They had American beer, the first American beer we had seen in most of us in a year and a half. As I recall, it was brewed by whoever was that owned the Yankees at the time. Anyway, we took off the next morning and went down to Dakar, which is further down the southern coast of west coast of Africa. Landed there, and in the meantime, I'm still getting this static about you going the wrong way. But the commander there said, well, you've come this far, you might as well go on across the South Atlantic. We took off from Dakar in good weather, filed a flight plan for about 10.5 hours to Natal, Brazil. Well, at the end of 10 hours, I asked Charlie, the navigator, how about time to let down? He said, sure, we'll make landfall in 30 minutes. So we started our letdown. 30 minutes passed, an hour passed, hour and a half passed, still no landfall. And we're getting pretty low on fuel by now. We had been doing celestial navigation, and Charlie had not done celestial navigation since he left flying school. And frankly, daytime celestial in those days, the only real fix you could get was at high noon. and we're not so sure that all our watches were all that accurate. At any rate, we missed landfall by about an hour and a half. And when we did make landfall, there was nothing there but just jungle. And I mean jungle, jungle, jungle. But finally, we tuned in the radio compass and homed in on Natal and landed without any problem. Except when I got off the aircraft, I was met by a staff car. Now, normally crews are met by a 6x6 truck, but I had a staff car. And I was wheeled up to the VIP quarters, very important person quarters, field grade quarters, which I thought was very nice. I'd never stayed in field grade quarters before. It was very nice. Well, here at, I might relate, back at Dakar, they had an ice cream machine. We hadn't seen ice cream in 18 months, so we tried to eat all of that they could provide us with, and that didn't set too well with stomachs that had been working on all those bars. Natal had a nice little item too called a hamburger. A real honest-to-goodness American hamburger. And of course we stuffed ourselves with those. From Natal, we went up to Georgetown, Guyana. It was a fairly short flight over jungle most all the way. I don't remember much about Georgetown except that I got a haircut. And the little barber didn't speak a word of English. In fact, I don't know what he spoke, but it wasn't English. But he had 6 or 7 razors and 6 or 7 pairs of scissors and 6 or 7 combs, which were located about 5 or 6 feet from the barber's chair. And he would take a snip and dance over and change whatever he was using and dance back and take a snip, and all the time he's jabbering in his own language, but I couldn't understand. But I could see that razor. Boy, I can still see that razor. I worried about getting home with ears. The next morning, we took off and went to what is now Ramey Air Force Base. It's closed, but it was named Ramey when it was closed. In 1945, it was Borinquen, Fio, Puerto Rico. There we stocked up on BX items. I bought Peggy an alligator purse, which later on I had to buy a fur coat to match it. Bought gifts for everybody I could think of. And then the following morning, we took off for West Palm Beach, Florida. About halfway between Puerto Rico and West Palm Beach, we were able to tune in a Miami radio station. And for the first time in 18 months or so here, advertising, and we felt like we were home again. We landed at West Palm Beach. The engineering officer came out in a Jeep, met us, and I presented him with all the paperwork on this whole aircraft. He took one look at it, thumbed through it, climbed up on the hood of his Jeep and pulled out his paint bucket out of the back seat and put a great big red X on my airplane. It was unflyable and was headed for the boneyard. The next day, we were supposed to take a troop train to Camp Blanding, Florida, and from there we would be dispersed to wherever our homes were for 30 days leave. That's the day they quit running the troop train every day. They ran the troop train every other day. So we had to spend the night in West Palm Beach, which really wasn't all that bad. And then the troop train up to Camp Blanding, and that thereby ends this tale. A P.S. to this tale. The reason I was treated as a VIP at Natal, and the same thing happened at Georgetown and at Borinquen also, I was met by staff car and given the VIP treatment. My flight plan said pilot Wooten. At the time that these flights were taking place, the commanding general of that part of the Air Force was a man named Ralph Wooten. And the people at those bases had no way of knowing whether Wooten was Wooten. Wooten was the general. So I was treated as a general until they got a good look at me. And then that ended that, and I got back to being a brand new major again. In addition, when we got to West Palm Beach, I tried to call Peggy. Well, telephone lines in 1945 are not what they are today. And I don't recall ever getting that phone call through, but I do recall spending several hours waiting in line at a phone booth and not being able to get my call through. Now that ends the tale.